The New York City subway system is one of the few public transportation networks that runs 24/7, 365 days a year. It's also consistently rated as the worst subway system in the world. Riders miss meetings, family gatherings, and major life events because they end up stuck for hours on the subway. How did things get so bad? The answer to this question has to do with several factors. Age, misuse of funds, and corruption all play a major role in the constant delays and breakdowns of New York City subways. However, there could be hope for the outdated system, which could make the lives of its millions of daily riders better, and those same lessons could be applied around the world to make improvements everywhere. Before we examine the reasons why the New York City subway has found itself in disrepair and the bane of travelers' existence, we need to understand some key factors about the system. This will bring to light how important the network is and why it desperately needs to be fixed. First, one of the craziest facts about the New York City subway is that the amount of people that use the subway has grown a huge amount in recent years. The number of daily riders has nearly doubled since the year 2000 to nearly 5.7 million people per day in 2019. The number decreased dramatically during the COVID-19 pandemic, but the amount of riders per year has been climbing again and is now roughly 4 million people per day. And with more riders comes more delays and problems. In fact, around 40% of all delays are due to overcrowding, and only around 65% of trains reach their destinations on time during weekdays. This is not good. In fact, it's the worst track record of any subway system in the world. Especially when you consider that New York City actually only has the 8th biggest subway system in the world based on track length. China holds 5 of the top 10 spots, with Shanghai at number 1, and with London and Moscow all bigger than New York City too, but with better performance when it comes to delays. But did you know that the subway in New York City isn't actually run by the city at all? The state of New York is technically in charge, with the subway being part of the larger Metro Transit Authority, or MTA system. The subways are patrolled by the MTA Police Department, along with the New York Police Department's Transit Bureau. In 2019, 2.4 billion riders used the MTA as a whole, meaning that the average weekday ridership was around 7.7 million people. This just goes to show how massive the MTA system is and how much strain is being put on the subways, buses, and other trains that are part of the network. And it's a big network. Just the subway portion of the MTA is made up of around 6,700 cars that travel over 665 miles of tracks. So it's clear that, like just about everything in New York City, the subway system is massive. It's the main way that New Yorkers and visitors get around the city. But even though it is one of the most important parts of New York's infrastructure, the subway system has been neglected for decades. Now, years of underfunding and the blatant disregard for routine maintenance are starting to catch up with the MTA and the New York government. Recent investigations and probes into the state and New York City subways have uncovered a willingness of politicians and officials to blatantly disregard the dire need for repairs and updates. Instead, money is being bled from the MTA and used selfishly by the government and outside entities at the expense of a subway system that millions rely on. The New York subway system is the worst in the world due to a number of factors, including corruption and mismanagement. And we're going to break down what exactly is going on in New York and how it has impacted the subways over time. This will be a bumpy ride full of twists and turns, but understanding how the New York City subway system became so bad may serve as a cautionary tale for the other transit departments around the world. But there's still hope for New York, and we'll also look at several cost-effective ways that New York's subways could be fixed. The first reason that's led to New York having the worst subway system in the world? Its age. In 1878, the first reliable elevated train began running along Greenwich Street and 9th Avenue from Lower Manhattan to Harlem. However, it wasn't until October 27, 1904, that the operation of the first New York City subway commenced. As unbelievable as it sounds, the New York City subway system is almost 120 years old, and some of the ancient technology and tracks from early in its lifetime are still in use today. In fact, some of the parts are so old that the MTA can no longer buy replacement parts from the original manufacturers, as they have either gone out of business or just don't make the parts anymore. Therefore, in certain situations, the MTA has components specially made in order to refurbish its oldest tracks and trains. The train cars, such as those running on the Sea Line, are brightliners from the 1960s, meaning that the frames, chassis, and wheels are around 60 years old. To put this into perspective, these train cars were being used 3 decades before the first smartphone was invented. So these trains have seen a lot of wear and tear in their lifetime. The brightliners tend to break down every 33,000 miles. The average modern subway car typically breaks down every 400,000 miles, with the newest ones lasting around 750,000 miles before encountering problems. These older models that are still in use in the New York City subway system are one of the many factors that lead to delays. But the ancient train cars are not the only outdated technology utilized by the MTA. The signaling system in New York subways is also decades old and unreliable. This is only exacerbated by the fact that routine maintenance and inspections are rarely carried out on time, if at all. Each year that goes by without upgrading the signaling system brings the entire subway that much closer to disaster. Not only do these signaling problems cause frequent delays, but they can be dangerous. If a signal malfunctions or stops working, it could lead to accidents that could cost lives and shut down entire swaths of tracks. These aging signals may have contributed to 2 famous crashes as well. In the 1991 Union Square derailment, a southbound 4 train derailed due to excessive speed as it entered Union Square Station, resulting in 5 deaths and over 200 injuries. The motorman was found to have been drunk, but the age of the signals and infrastructure exacerbated the severity of the accident, as they failed to provide adequate safeguards against human error. Similarly, the 1995 Williamsburg Bridge subway collision involved 2 trains crashing into one another, injuring scores of passengers. An investigation found that while the primary cause was human error, the aged signaling system failed to prevent the accident or mitigate its effects. With more modern signaling, the system might have automatically stopped one or both of the trains before the collision. During Governor Andrew Cuomo's time in office, his administration enacted a $500 million cut in funding to the MTA that was earmarked for improving the signaling system. After the cut was made, MTA records show that there were approximately 124 train delays due to signal issues in a single morning. Clearly, the signaling system was and still is a problem. On the same day, at least another 24 delays occurred due to trains breaking down with motor, brake, and air conditioning problems. The lack of funding to improve and update old New York City subway signals and train cars is one of the major reasons why riders face such frequent and long delays every time they set foot on a train. The second big problem plaguing the New York City subway? It's simply too popular, leading to overcrowding and overuse. The New York City subway carries nearly 2 billion passengers on its rails every year. This is a staggering number, and one that the current system was never designed to handle. Currently, the single factor that causes the most delays, according to the MTA, is overcrowding, with the vast number of people trying to cram themselves into subway cars during rush hour being responsible for around 37% of all delays. In the first 4 months of 2017, this translated into 111,000 trains failing to reach their destination on time. Many politicians and MTA officials cite the massive number of riders as the reason why there are so many delays. But it's more complicated than that. Yes, the millions of riders each day do contribute to delays during peak travel times, but this is only because the subway system has been neglected for so long, and the necessary improvements to help mitigate the growing number of riders were never implemented. We'll need to examine why this happened later on. But suffice it to say that although overcrowding is a huge problem, it didn't need to have such a negative impact on the system as a whole if the New York City subway was properly funded and maintained. Then there's the fact that some of the data the MTA uses to support their claim that there are just too many riders doesn't add up. In March of 2015, the MTA recorded 153 million trips with 19,000 delays caused by overcrowding. However, 2 years later in March of 2017, the MTA reported there were fewer rides at around 151 million, yet there were 30,000 delays due to overcrowding. So even when there were fewer people, there were more delays. This has led some to suggest that the MTA might be manipulating numbers or erroneously attributing delays to overcrowding when they are more of a systematic problem. This is being done to shift the blame away from the MTA and the government for the dysfunctional subway system. Which leads us to the crux of the situation as to why the New York City subway system is the worst in the world: inefficiency and lack of funds. The New York City government has traditionally been responsible for around 10% of the MTA's total budget. However, since 1990, cost-cutting has led to a decrease in contributions by around 75%, resulting in the MTA scrambling for ways to raise more funds, such as rate hikes and borrowing money. As funding has been pulled, routine and preventative maintenance has been put on hold or cut altogether. The consequence of such actions is that the entire subway system began to deteriorate faster than anyone expected. When adjusted for inflation, the budget allocated for subway maintenance has barely changed in 25 years, even though there are more problems and more riders than ever before. But lack of funds isn't the only problem. Even when money is allocated to the MTA, it's oftentimes mismanaged. Planned repairs frequently go over budget or take longer than expected. This then exacerbates the funding problem and leads to the MTA needing more money to complete old projects. In fact, the lack of funds and mismanagement of money has led to the MTA to borrow money to meet its needs. Around 17% of the MTA's total budget is spent to pay down debt it's incurred over years of incompetent leadership and mismanagement of funds. These problems came as little surprise when it was uncovered that turnover and changes to the management structure of the MTA are frequent events. But this is nothing new for the New York City subway system. Prior to the 1970s, the same problems that are facing the system today almost led to the collapse of the transportation network. However, rather than letting everything fall apart as government officials and MTA management is doing today, the leadership in the past decided to invest heavily in the subway and improve it. Approximately $50 billion of today's money was poured into the MTA so that proper maintenance and construction of new infrastructure could be carried out. This resulted in the trains traveling almost 10 times further before breaking down when compared to today's system. However, rather than keeping up the proper funding over the decades, the slashing of the MTA's budget from the highest levels of government resulted in many of the problems that the New York City subway system faces today. These funding problems came to a head in 2008 when the country found itself in a financial crisis. New York City, being the financial capital of the nation, was hit particularly hard. This resulted in some tragic consequences for the subway system and other infrastructure in New York. Revenue from real estate dropped around 75% in New York City during this time, resulting in a $1 billion drop in funds. This led to 40 types of subway maintenance being halted. Routine work on train cars shifted from every 66 days to every 73 days, and comprehensive overhauls of trains and the system as a whole were extended by a year. All of these measures were taken to mitigate the bleeding of money due to lack of funds. However, even after the economy recovered, the maintenance schedules were not returned to normal. And a lot of this has to do with one thing: corruption. Let's be clear, politicians do some shady things, but there's perhaps no better example of government corruption than how the funding of the MTA has been handled over the past few decades. Riders, engineers, and employees of the MTA have been pleading with the New York government for years to fix the subway system and fund it properly. But their cries have fallen on deaf ears. City and state politicians have continually steered money away from fixing the issues and have even stolen money from the MTA that they then spend on some insane things. We know that signal problems due to outdated systems are a huge problem for the subway. However, mechanic positions have been continuously cut because there just isn't enough money to pay them. Yet the average salary for the subway managers has increased to over $240,000. And even though New York City is one of the most expensive places in the United States to live, the cost of living can't account for the exuberant amount of money being paid to management at the expense of maintenance crews and mechanics. In fact, the annual salaries for the same positions in cities like Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Washington is less than $115,000 a year. It's estimated that the cost of living in New York is between 10 to 20% higher than in those other cities, meaning that the average subway manager's salary in New York should be closer to $130,000. If this were the case, then there would be more money to pay maintenance workers and even hire the help that the system desperately needs to improve. But due to corruption in the government, management and administrators are getting paid exuberant sums of money. This will not help the New York City subway improve anytime soon. However, the MTA union is also partially to blame for the corruption that's led to money going into management's pockets instead of being invested in the workers and infrastructure that would fix the subway. The union requires that there be 2 MTA employees on every train when almost every other subway system in the world only has 1 worker per train. It's estimated that if New York City followed the status quo of 1 employee per train, like most of the rest of the world, it would save the MTA over $200 million a year. These funds could then be used to improve the system. When Governor Cuomo was in office, he was closely allied with the union, which resulted in the MTA union contributing $165,000 to his election campaign. Since the union's sole purpose is to look out for its members, the Cuomo administration made sure the union was happy at the expense of the maintenance and updating that the system actually needed. Some of the problems with overcrowding and old rails could be alleviated by building new lines. However, New York City now has fewer miles of track than it did during World War II, making it the only major subway system in the world to shrink over the past 80 years. The reason that new lines are so hard to build in New York is that labor unions and private contractors have become close with members of the government, which has allowed them to inflate construction costs, sometimes to 5 times the international average. This allows corporations to make exuberant amounts of profit at the expense of the riders and the subway system as a whole. There is no single person or political party to blame for the corruption around the MTA and its funding. Both Democrat and Republican politicians have held office as the subway system crumbles. Both parties cut the MTA budget by repurposing the revenues promised to the subway system. In fact, Governor Cuomo used $5 million of MTA money to bail out 3 state-run ski resorts that struggled to make a profit after a warm winter. This just shows the blatant amount of corruption that the New York City subway system has to overcome. Even worse is the fact that the New York government forces the MTA to pay the state for financial advice, IT help, and a number of other services that they don't need. The MTA has paid the state of New York $328 million in bond issuance fees over a 15-year period. That money could have gone to improving the system, but instead, the government continuously milked the MTA for cash instead of properly financing it. During certain years, the fees paid to the state for services the MTA didn't need was as much as 1% of its bond insurances, which is much higher than the original 0.2% originally agreed upon. And while the New York government said it required all agencies to pay such fees for their help, a New York Times investigation found that certain agencies were given waivers for those services so that they didn't have to pay every year. Unfortunately, the MTA rarely benefited from such waivers. When Mayor Rudy Giuliani took office, becoming the first Republican New York City mayor in nearly 2 decades, he immediately targeted the MTA and New York subway system. Giuliani was on a crusade to show he could improve the city without raising taxes. The Giuliani administration cut $400 million worth of city contributions to the subway system. This was done without any real plan to maintain the subway or increase efficiency. And even though hundreds of people protested the cuts outside of City Hall, the mayor made them anyways. The result of all these cuts and corrupt practices has resulted in the MTA fending for itself through fare hikes just to make ends meet. A large portion of the subway's budget once came from the government, but now 60% of the MTA's budget is procured through fares, which has left riders paying more to utilize the major transportation network in the city. The current fare for a ride is $2.90, which adds up when someone needs to take the subway every day to get to and from work. There's also the fact that government officials often want to use MTA funds to beautify stations rather than fix major problems. For example, after the September 11th attack on the World Trade Centers, the Fulton Street station was damaged. An influential assembly speaker by the name of Sheldon Silver went on a crusade to build a new Fulton Street station that would be dubbed the Grand Central of downtown. The price tag of the station was to be $750 million, a huge sum of money that could have been better spent to improve the way the subway ran rather than create a shiny new station. Yes, repairs needed to be made at Fulton Street, but they could have been done for much cheaper. When the station wasn't yet complete in 2008 and the cost of the project blew past the original budget, the MTA proposed that the station be finished without some of the more extravagant features. Silver then threatened to veto the MTA's funding if the Fulton Street station wasn't completed to his specification. This terrified MTA officials, and they agreed to build the subway station using the original plans, even though it would be way over budget. In 2015, Sheldon Silver stepped down as speaker after being charged with corruption. By the time the Fulton Street station was finished, it cost $1.4 billion. It did nothing to improve the New York City subway system. While corruption, incompetence, overcrowding, and age all have played a role in the deterioration of the New York City subway system, there may be ways to fix the system and make it more reliable. The first big step to an improved New York City subway system is that the MTA and government need to be more transparent with their data. Rather than skewing numbers to shift the blame, the MTA should be upfront about what is causing train delays so that engineers and urban planners can develop efficient ways to address the issues. However, if bad data is being presented, then the root of the problems may be overlooked. For example, in 2009 and 2010, the MTA recorded 530,000 delays, which was around 80% of the total, as being due to supplement schedule. This category was meaningless, as there was no clear definition for what supplement schedule meant, other than that it had something to do with maintenance or scheduling changes. If the MTA instead had created clear categories and were honest about what was causing the delays, then perhaps the issues could have been addressed. This is why transparency is so important. It's necessary to collect good data so informed decisions can be made to improve the system. The second big improvement might sound crazy, but bear with me. It's to shut down the subway. As mentioned earlier, the New York City subway is one of the only in the world that runs 24 hours a day. This means that there is very little time for scheduled maintenance. It also has been found that conducting maintenance and service checks when the trains are running is not cost-effective. It would be much cheaper to shut the subway system down so that mechanics and engineers could complete their tasks efficiently without having to stop what they're doing to allow a train to pass. The fact that there are always trains running means that repairs and maintenance take much longer to complete than in any other subway systems. If New York City shut down its subways for several hours each night for maintenance, it would allow workers to consistently get their jobs done without interfering with regular service. The Shanghai Metro has over twice as many riders as New York, and they close their system every night at 11 p.m. During the time that the subway is not running, people can take specially dedicated night buses that encounter minimal traffic and stop at the same places the subway does. This has proven to be much more efficient and allowed Shanghai to keep its subways in working order. If New York closed its subway system every night, even if it was from midnight to 5 a.m., a massive amount of work could get done. The MTA already has a huge bus fleet that could be utilized to carry passengers during the early morning hours when there's minimal traffic on the roads. This would allow mechanics in the subway to work continuously and unimpeded for several hours every day. There are numerous problems with conducting maintenance while trains are still running. It leads to unnecessary delays as trains have to slow to a crawl whenever they approach a part of the tracks that are being worked on. Plus, there's always the risk that someone could get injured if the conductor or the workers are not paying attention. Shutting down the subway every night for maintenance reduces these risks to zero and would be much more efficient for everyone. Shutting down the subway for scheduled work each night would also end up saving the MTA and New York government money. New York City Transit spends around $1.9 billion annually on track maintenance, which is approximately 4 times more than every other rail system in the United States. This is because the MTA needs to pay flaggers to keep an eye out for oncoming trains while repair crews are working. Working while subway service is happening also results in delays for both the trains and the construction project, which bleeds even more money from the system. Similar improvements could be seen by reducing interlining. Interlining is when multiple train lines converge and follow the same track. This happens with almost every train in New York City when they enter Manhattan. It should come as no surprise that when multiple lines converge, it can lead to congestion and delays. This occurs daily in New York City. Also, in the event that a train breaks down on one of the interlines, all of the trains that use that section of the track become delayed. Therefore, a solution to this problem is building more tracks that run parallel to one another, but do force different lines to cross onto the same rail. This would greatly reduce the number of delays caused by track fires and broken down trains. The initial cost to build a dedicated track for each line would be pricey. However, the benefits would be worth it for riders. The trains would run more efficiently and would reduce the amount of wear and tear the core lines currently receive. It is where multiple lines converge that tracks need the most maintenance, as it's these locations that see the heaviest traffic. Another improvement that sounds small and insignificant, but would have a massive impact on the subway, would be the installation of platform barriers. Many of the most efficient subway systems around the world build plexiglass barriers between the tracks and the platforms at their stations. These barriers help reduce the chances that a passenger will go onto the tracks and also reduces the amount of objects and debris that fall onto the rails. Literally, none of the New York City subway stations have these barriers, and the results speak for themselves. People on the tracks and rail fires account for a decent percentage of delays in the system. It is estimated that there are close to 1,000 incidents of passengers either falling or climbing onto the tracks each year. On top of that, there are over 700 track fires annually caused by trash on the rails. Barriers on subway platforms have been shown to greatly reduce both of these incidents. Likewise, these barriers can also help with the flow of passengers entering and exiting the train, resulting in fewer MTA workers needed to oversee each station. This would help reduce the daily costs of operating the trains in New York's subway. Even if the MTA implemented platform barriers at just some of the busiest stations in New York, such as Times Square and Grand Central, it would make a huge difference. And these barriers would go hand in hand with making the whole subway have better platforms. Although this might not seem like something that would improve the subway system, there is something to be said about better passenger flow in stations. The overcrowding of the subway and the resulting delays has a lot to do with the way some of New York City's platforms are designed. They are long and narrow with only a few and sometimes only one entrance and exit. This leads to human traffic jams during rush hour as passengers scramble to reach the train before its doors shut while a surge of riders tries to exit the station. The narrow platforms also pose a greater risk that passengers might slip and fall onto the tracks. This is why conductors are oftentimes repurposed as platform agents during busy travel time, which results in increased costs for the MTA. New York City could extend platforms and add more entry and exit points to help alleviate congestion. This would greatly reduce the number of delays as a result of overcrowding. An easy way to accomplish this in some stations would be by removing newsstands that are not necessary. Other stations would need to undergo a complete renovation, but in the end, this would lead to trains being able to approach and leave stations much more quickly. And then there's another idea that sounds completely crazy based on everything else we've looked at. But again, bear with me, since there's actually a case to be made for increasing the speed limits of trains. This may sound dangerous, but there are unnecessary speed restrictions currently in place that cause massive delays and inefficiency along certain New York City subway routes. There is no denying that there have been accidents in the past due to reckless or fatigued train driving. These incidents resulted in the MTA lowering speed limits in certain sections of the subway system. However, new technology and better train brakes have made subway travel much safer, even if something does go wrong. That being said, the MTA would need to update its trains to incorporate these safety features, which means it might be time to retire the subway cars from the 1960s. There are long stretches of track with no stations that have speed limits lower than what is standard around the world. By increasing the speed at which trains can travel on these portions of tracks, travel time could be reduced. This would help with congestion and delays, which in turn would reduce costs. What it comes down to is that New York City needs to invest time, money, and serious planning into its subway system if it has any hope of improving. For decades, the New York City subway has suffered neglect at the hands of greedy politicians, short-sighted unions, and corrupt officials. However, it's not too late. By implementing changes and providing the MTA with the funds it needs, New York City could have one of the best subways in the world. But the government has to want that change. The riders of New York suffer every day, and their concerns fall on deaf ears. The only way that the New York subway system will improve is if there's a fundamental shift in the way routine maintenance is conducted and updated technology is implemented. It will be a huge undertaking to improve the many problems with New York's subways, but it can be done. Now go watch The Real Reason Why Italy's plan to build a bridge to Sicily won't work, or check out The Real Reason India Can't Build Skyscrapers.